We've got an Nvidia T600, and we've got a Dell Optiplex. Can we put them together to make a great little budget gaming PC? Well, I don't know. Probably. Let's find out. Oh, hey, how you doing? I'm TechDweeb. Thanks for clicking on the video today. You guys know that I love the T600. It's a great GPU. It offers really good performance for the price, and it's just so little and cute. Just look at this thing. You're a little cutie, aren't you? Yes, you are. You're the cutest thing I've ever seen. I mean, you're cute too, Hermione. Oh, this is awkward. The reason it's so small and cute is because it's a small form factor. This should fit in any of those small form factor machines. You know, those old office PCs like the Dell Optiplex. Like this Dell Optiplex actually. This is the Optiplex 3020. Small form factor, and it cost me $80. You can find these at even better prices if you keep your eye on your local market. Good deals pop up all the time on eBay too. They come in all sorts of configurations. This one came with an i5 4690, 16 gigabytes of RAM. It additionally had a single 8 gigabyte stick, so I added another for a total of 16 gigabytes, and it has a 500 gigabyte hard drive. We're gonna upgrade to a 240 gigabyte SSD for $25 and add the GPU, our T600, which cost me $185. The total cost of this entire little gaming PC cost me about $300, if you can believe that. The T600 offers great performance for the price. I made a video comparing this GPU to the 1650 and the 1050 Ti, link to that video in the description below. Both of those GPUs have low profile versions, but neither of those are single slot. This is like the only low profile single slot GPU that you can find at a good price. Oh, this is the T400, I guess. I've had a lot of questions about whether or not you could use a T400 or a T600 in a Dell Optiplex because they only support single slot PCIe expansion. It's a good question. In theory, it should work, but there's only one way to find out. Let's rip the cover off and get a look at those juicy insides. The first step is to take out that optical drive. We're not going to be using that because we need our SATA ports for the hard drive and our new SSD. There's the hard drive right there, 500 gigabytes. Good enough to get started with a small game library. I think I mentioned that I upgraded this to 16 gigabytes dual channel. This came with only one 8 gigabyte stick, so I just added another 8 gigabyte stick. Here's a problem. We only have one SATA power cable. Now, we can either get one of those optical drive bay replacements that let you mount a SATA SSD using the optical drive bay mini SATA power, but I didn't have one. So I opted for using one of these SATA power splitter cables. Because I already had this. And it turns one SATA power cable into two. We shouldn't have any power issues here because SATA SSDs, they hardly use any power at all. And now on to the star of the show, the T600. We need to swap out the full bracket for the low profile bracket that came with the GPU. And there we go, ready to install. Like I said before, this Optiplex only supports single slot PCIe expansion. So GPUs like this T600 are pretty much your only choice for decent gaming performance in a form factor like this. There's a pretty good fan at the front that kicks in when the case gets warm, but I'm curious to see if there will be any big thermal issues when we get into some gaming tests. So there we go, GPU is installed. Now we need to add our SSD. I'm just gonna shove this SSD in here with the hard drive. I could double-sided tape it in or whatever, but I'm lazy. It's pretty tight in there. It's not going anywhere. That'll be good enough. Now we need to plug in our SATA data cables and our SATA power cables from our splitter. And there we go, all set up. That was pretty easy. Let's fire this thing up and play some games. Right after this word from our sponsor, Linude. This video is brought to you by Linude. Linude is a DOS cloud platform DOS thing that lets you do DOS stuff in the cloud. Using Linude, sad, lonely, divorced dorks like you can run your own virtual DOS environments for all your DOS needs, anywhere, anytime. Need to manage autoexec.bat while you're waiting in your crappy car to pick up your kids from your successful ex-wife who's slowly turning them against you like a manipulative succubus? No problem. Linude supports the latest graphical technologies such as MS-DOS Shell and cutting-edge application platforms like QBasic. It's so simple, even your kids who don't love you could do it. Just log into your Linude account at linude.io, and before you can say binary bubble sort, you'll be slinging sick DOS commands like dir/w. format a:/q, and even rmdir.exe/s/qc:/. Don't be left behind while the cool husbands DOS their way to awesome DOS fun and successful long-lasting relationships. Just go to linude.io/signup and use offer code C:/TechDweeb.exe to start your free trial, and you'll be up and running before you can defrag C. Thank you Linude for sponsoring the video. I had to clone the contents of the hard drive over to the SSD. I used a program called Macrium Reflect. I might make a tutorial on how to do that. Let me know in the comments below if you'd find that helpful. As you can see, this machine has an i5-4690, 16 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM, running at 1600 MHz in dual channel mode, and of course there's our T600, running with the latest Nvidia game-ready drivers. Starting off with my favorite benchmark game, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, running at 1080p, medium preset, and we get 40 FPS average. That's a really good start. This is a third-person action game, so play with the controller and you'll get a very console-like experience running with these FPS. The game looks great at these settings too, and you can use the resolution scale to bump this down to 900p, or run with the low preset, which still looks great if you wanted to get up to 60 plus FPS. But I think 40-ish FPS on a game like this, that's a good sweet spot. It's more of a sightseeing game anyway, so I prefer to keep the graphics as high as possible while still getting a playable FPS. Here's The Witcher 3, running at 1080p with the medium preset, and we end up with 53 FPS average by the end of this run. Again, a really good showing here. I play this game with a controller and I have no need to play at a full 60 FPS. The 1% lows aren't too bad at all, so it's a very consistent 50 plus FPS experience. Let's quickly talk about the temperatures here. I'm getting a max of 73 degrees, but when it gets that high, the fan on the Optiplex kicks into high gear, and it's a tad on the loud side. And when I did some stress test benchmarks, the GPU got up to almost 80 degrees, and it was definitely throttling. Whether or not this would happen in a case with good airflow is hard to say, but in this situation you may come across some circumstances where the small form factor Optiplex case gets pretty warm. It hasn't been a deal breaker in any of my testing, but I did want to mention that. I guess it also depends on the CPU you have in there too, how much heat that's generating. Just make sure you clear out any of the dust, make sure your fans are all in good working order. Even consider taking off the other PCIe slot cover, because that can help with some airflow. And worst case scenario, if you run games that cause your GPU to get too hot, you can just let it throttle, or you can even take the side off the case. Nothing wrong with opening up the case and letting it have all the air it could want. Heck, I do that with my Ryzen 5800X and my 3080 sometimes when the action gets a little too hot for comfort.
Loser.
Here's some Doom. Running at 1080p, ultra settings, no motion blur, because it makes the YouTube videos look weird, although I do play with motion blur personally. I don't get why everybody hates motion blur so much, I think it looks good. Anyway, we got an average of exactly 60 FPS. This is one of those games that you might want to play with higher FPS, so you can lower the settings a bit, obviously. I think 60 FPS is great in this game as long as it's consistent. And it was very consistent here, as you can see by those 1% lows. Felt very smooth. And it looks freaking amazing. This game is getting a bit older now. Came out in like 2016. And it's been superseded by Doom Eternal. But I just keep going back to this one. It's one of those games that gets my blood pumping. But you need sometimes, Ripping the heads off demons helps you deal with life's ups and downs. It's therapy. Cyberpunk 2077. This was a bit of a journey. I started off with the low preset, Performance FSR, and I only got about 30 FPS. And it didn't feel very good, very stuttery. You could tell by the stats that the CPU was maxed right out, so I decided to go down to 720p native, and we didn't really gain any performance. Alright, so if that's not gonna work, we're gonna stick with 720p and enable balanced FSR, and the FPS didn't really change. The CPU is still maxed out too, so I didn't think that there was much that I could do to gain some FPS here, but I had a subscriber mention that my Cyberpunk performance wasn't consistent with the performance that he'd seen, and I think I finally figured it out. I was lowering the graphics, but I never bothered touching the crowd density. When I lowered that, we jumped from 33 FPS up to 40 FPS, and the 1% lows got better too. The game felt much smoother. Not amazing. As you can see, that CPU is still maxed out, and the GPU is only running at around 60 or 70%, which means that the CPU is definitely the bottleneck in this setup. But I'm glad I figured out how to get boosted the FPS, even at low settings. And hey, that's Cyberpunk for you. There's always something holding it back, but at least you could play it on this PC. I'd probably opt for 720p native, no FSR, with low crowd density, and I can enjoy the game like this. It's not ideal, but it's not the worst thing in the world.
Come here,
And now on to CSGO, running at 1080p, medium settings, and we averaged around 140 FPS. I didn't bother getting the MSI Afterburner overlay working because it's a pain in the buns, so I'll just have to live with Steam's built-in FPS counter. This is a good FPS for this game. I think lots of people who play CSGO like to play at higher FPS for like 144Hz monitors. This is a fine system to run at really high FPS in these esports style games. I personally don't like lowering the settings too much. I think 100Hz is usually plenty for me, but I'm not a very competitive gamer, so what do I know? This is a more processor-intensive game, and I will mention that we are getting a processor bottleneck on this setup. The processor is about 15% of a bottleneck against the T600, which you don't want usually. You don't want more than a 10% bottleneck from either your CPU or your GPU. So here the performance isn't going to be as good as it would be if we were running with a i7 or a newer i5, like a 6th gen i5. So just keep that in mind. We're not trying to build the best gaming system here. We just want to see how it all works as a budget build and whether that T600 has any issues running in this setup. So while it's not ideal, it's plenty good enough, in my opinion. Fortnite, kids. Let's go. Now, this is another situation where I personally don't like to lower the settings too low because I enjoy games that look good. This is one of the reasons I play games, is for the virtual sightseeing. I don't leave my mom's basement very often, so, I gotta do my sightseeing virtually, as sad as that is. I do like the way this game looks when the graphics aren't at their very lowest, but I know lots of people like a competitive experience, so I'm going to show you how this game runs on this setup with 1080p, low settings, performance mode, but I bumped up the draw distance to epic. This is the most competitive settings, I think. It definitely did the trick. We got 151 FPS. And we could get that even higher if we use resolution scale to bump the resolution down to 900p. It felt great. There were a few stutters, but that's because I'm running the game off an external hard drive. This always happens when I run the game off my games drive, so, the actual performance would be better if we ran this off the internal hard drive, or even better off the SSD. This is literally my first time playing the game at these super low settings, and while I did miss my shadows and grass and my other eye candy, it wasn't a bad experience. I could see how this is more competitive too, without so much visual stuff on the screen to distract you from seeing enemies. I did pretty good too. Second place, baby. I'm number 2. I'm number 2. And last but not least, GTA 5. Our game benchmarks standard candle. 1080p, high settings, 88 FPS average. Lower those settings for more FPS or run at a lower resolution. Yeah, you know the drill. GTA 5, it's an older game. It runs on almost anything with really great performance. It looks great. It's still a super popular game. I still play this game from time to time. I played through the entire single player back on the Xbox 360, and then I played through it again when it came out on the PC. and now I'm about halfway through my third playthrough. There's just something about this game that pulls you in. Sometimes I'll fire it up just to cause some mayhem, but then I'll get sidetracked and end up playing 2 or 3 story missions, and before I know it, my mom is telling me it's bedtime. So, there you go. Can you use a T400 or a T600 or a T1000 in a small form factor Dell Optiplex that only supports 1 PCIe slot? Heck yeah, you can. And you'll have a great gaming PC on your hands. For the price, man, this is hard to beat. It's a nice looking little system too. I like the way these Optiplex towers look. It's freaking tiny. It runs cool and quiet. No problems at all. Not bad for a little $300 gaming PC, am I right? And that brings us to the end. I hope you found this useful, or at least entertaining. Please let me know in the comments, what do you think of this setup? Thinking of building something like this with a T600? Any questions? I'd love to hear from you down there in the comments. And while you're down there, click the thumbs up button if you liked the video, or the thumbs down button if you didn't. Subscribe for more videos like this. As always, I'm TechDweeb. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.